So listen, we found out today, funny how stories work out, the World Health Organization today formally announcing that COVID-19 is no longer considered a global emergency or a global threat. And then earlier this week, really only a couple of days ago, something else that's out there right now, which we talked about, I think, back in the winter, RSV, which is a respiratory virus that was going around. A lot of people ended up in hospitals for that. Well, now, what we found out this week was there has been an approved vaccine, at least in the USA, for RSV. We wanted to find out a bit more. Dr. CHRIS Labos, a cardiologist who joins us from time to time. And by the way, you can also hear him here on CJAD Sunday mornings at 8:10 on Weekends with Ken. So Dr. Labos, RSV, let's go back a little bit and first of all, bring people up to date on what that was, because I'm sure that hasn't necessarily gone away either.
No, it hasn't. I mean, RSV is a virus that we've seen many, many times. It's usually a virus that peaks in the winter months. I mean, it's not an accident that we tend to call winter cold and flu season. Now, it's neither the cold nor the flu. It's one of the other respiratory viruses, but it can make you quite sick. The people who are at greatest risk are usually the very young and the very old. And why people might remember this is that it was sort of late summer, actually, so it was a bit earlier than expected, but there was a massive, massive uptick in RSV cases in children, and the pediatric hospitals got very, very overwhelmed last year. So because of that, because of the worry that RSV might have, good and bad years in the same way that influenza has good and bad years, the development of an RSV vaccine has been a high priority. And in fact, it's not new. People have been trying to work on this for decades. It's just that up until now, their attempts have been met largely with failure. And so this is the first time that we actually have an approved vaccine, at least in the U.S., probably very, very shortly in Canada. And it's the result of actually two different companies, GSK and Pfizer, have both developed vaccines using a slightly different form of technology than what's been tried before. And this time they've been successful. So going forward, probably in the fall, you're going to start to see the rollout for an RSV vaccine, at least for the very old and the very young, to try to prevent and keep them out of hospital.
So, Dr. Labos, when I hear you say that this has been in the works for like 60 years, but now because there was more of a pressing need, it's been developed, it makes me immediately think of the COVID vaccine and how people are like, it came out too quickly, there wasn't, but we'd heard that it too had been in the works for years and years. So is it kind of a similar situation here?
Yeah, it's kind of a similar situation. I mean, the COVID vaccine was developed within the course of a year because COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, the virus that caused it, obviously didn't exist prior to the end of 2019. But the technology on which it was based, mRNA technology, was actually not that new. It was around before, but there was never a pressing need, or there was no problem you could use it against. This is a slightly different situation in that RSV has been around for years, decades, right? There's always been a seasonal RSV period, usually in the late fall, early winter. It's just that attempts to make a vaccine before were largely unsuccessful. And what's changed, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, it's about pre-fusion versus post-fusion of the F protein. So a very specific part of the virus that researchers were targeting, and now they tried to target something else, and that has led to a much more successful vaccine. So it was really that sort of scientific innovation. So it is a new vaccine in the sense that they've targeted a different protein or a different part of the protein in a different part of the cycle of the virus, but it's not as if they've reinvented the wheel and come out with something that is so different that it's going to be dangerous. It is, in many ways, a fairly standard vaccine. It's just that the researchers behind it used a different or a new technique to develop the vaccine to make it more effective.
So to your point about the elderly or the very young, of course, who are the ones most seriously affected, now that this has been approved in the U.S., it doesn't mean you can walk into your doctor's office and simply say, I heard this thing was approved there, can I get it here? It doesn't work that way. How long typically till Health Canada gives the green light to something like this?
So we never really know. The data has been submitted to Health Canada. This is what was announced by the company. So I imagine that Health Canada is going to make a decision at some point in the next little while, either now or during the summer, with one presumes the idea of rolling this vaccine out in the fall when it would do the most good, and that's exactly what the U.S. is going to do. The GSK vaccine, the one that was approved in the U.S., was studied in people 60 and up. The Pfizer vaccine, if people might remember this story from back in the fall, they actually did 2 separate trials, one in people over the age of 60, but they also vaccinated pregnant women so that their new babies would have antibodies against RSV, because you can't vaccinate very young infants because they still have their mother's antibodies and they won't generate their own antibodies at that point. So their strategy was you vaccinate the pregnant mothers so that they pass the antibodies on to their babies. And so they have that protection for the first 3 to 6 months of life when they would be the most vulnerable to the infection. So that's the Pfizer data. And so we'll see when Health Canada gets around to approving both of these vaccines, whose data I think has been submitted at this point.
It's good news.
Dr. Labos, thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Take care.
You bet.
Thank
Dr.
you.
CHRIS Labos. There you go. That's the RSV vaccine, soon hopefully to be approved here for those most in danger.